Okay, wait, thanks for the very warm welcome. And as Jen mentioned, I will be talking about today about taking Nuxt to the backend. So as Jen already announced me, my name is Jakub, depending on where you're connecting from. But for the easiness, Jakub Andrzejewski is like pronounceable around the world. I work at Vue Storefront, and I'm also a Google developer expert in web performance. I'm ambassador for several organizations, and for my hobbies, I am technical diver. I like traveling. I like Dungeons and Dragons, Lego, Transformers, and obviously Marvel, Star Wars, and Lord of the Rings. So if you'd like to talk to me about any of these topics, you can find me on Twitter or X at Jakub Andrzejewski. I'm always happy to talk about any of them, either related to the hobbies or open source or development in general. So in the Nuxt ecosystem, you might know me from few modules, from security module that I also created a Mighty Byte about, and Algolia and Cloudinary. So stay tuned until the end of my presentation because I will have a cool announcement about Nuxt security, but it will happen in a while. Apart from that, I also have a blog on Dev2 where I'm posting weekly about either Vue.js or Nuxt, so you can check it out. And I also have a YouTube channel where I'm also sharing some video tutorials mainly about using Nuxt in several different cases. So I have this quote that I created some time ago that Nuxt is an amazing front-end framework that allows Vue developers to build full-stack applications. This means that one can develop an application writing CSS and SQL in one codebase, which basically for me was always a dream because I didn't like the separation of the front end and the back end. And Nuxt gave me the opportunity to basically do both of them at the same time. So what if I told you that this full stack framework of Nuxt can be used to build a fully functional backend microservice that can be later consumed by other services? But first, to answer this question, we need to answer one more question. So what runs on the backend of Nuxt? On the backend or the server of Nuxt? So Nuxt 3 introduced a new server engine called Nitro, and Puya will be giving a full talk about the future of Nitro, so make sure to check it out as well. So Nitro is a cross-platform, has a cross-platform support for Node.js browsers and service workers. It supports serverless out of the box. It supports APIs, API routes, to be more specific. It has automatic code splitting, supports hybrid mode, and basically has hot module reloading in development. All the goodies you might need to build a server application. But apart from the server itself, Nuxt also comes with H3, which is used to work with server API endpoints and the middleware. So what H3 does under the hood is it basically allows you to handle requests and responses and return objects out of them, and also comes with several useful utils such as body parsing, cookie handling, redirects, and many, many more. So if we combine both of them together, the Nitro and the H3 and the Nuxt itself, we will get something like this, what you probably experienced already or used already. So the server directory of Nuxt, where Nuxt will automatically detect everything that you put in the server under the name of API, middleware, and root, and will register API and server handlers with that. So if we create, for example, API, let's say called hello.ts in the server/server/API with the code such as this one, and then we will call it from our Vue application, like shown on the right side, we will basically get the data. So we have this connection between the front end and the backend, or the server, to be more specific. So Nitro helps us build full stack apps with Nuxt, right? So the answer is yes. And we can also use this Nitro and H3, drilling H3, to build backend as well. And this is also what I wanted to show you today. So how we can build a fully functional backend microservice with Nuxt and more specifically Nitro. So you might ask me, but Jacob, what is a microservice? Maybe I'm not aware of this term. So I'm glad you asked. So microservice or microservice architecture is basically a style where your application is composed out of several services. And those services, they are deployed independently. They are not connected, like strictly connected to each other. They are loosely coupled. They are used for mapping certain business domain, and they are owned by a small team. So let's say that you have an e-commerce application. So you might have microservice for handling orders, for authenticating users, for delivering the products to the users, and stuff like that. So this architecture allows the organization to basically have the independent deployments and deliver very big features without the need to just deploy one application, because they can deploy them independently. So in the application that I will be building, it will be very simple, but I will be using Nuxt Supabase as the database for my application. I will be using Nuxt Security, the module that I already mentioned, and I will be using it purely because of the course support. And I will be deploying it to Vercel. So just before we jump into the code, I have a small remark for you. So the application that we will showcase today, it's more like the example of what we can use both Nuxt and Nitro for, rather than a great design pattern. It's more like the showcase of the fact that basically Nuxt and Nitro can be used to achieve almost everything we desire. So let's go to the code. And I have two applications. Basically, the first application is called Cat Provider, and the second one is Cat Consumer. But don't be afraid, we won't be eating any cats. It's just for the sake of consumer provider naming convention. So the provider, which will be a Nuxt app that will act as a backend microservice, will connect to Supabase to fetch the data and return this data to the user. However, the Cat Consumer is just a regular Nuxt-free application that basically fetches the data from the REST API that we will be exposing from the Cat Provider. So I have, as I'm very bad at doing the live coding, especially in terms of timing, I have already done a lot of the work. So I just want to show you what I did. So for the Cat Provider, so the service that is used to provide data to another application, as I mentioned, I am using Supabase, Nuxt Supabase, and Nuxt Security just for course configuration. For your application, make sure to use like proper course functionality. In this case, I only needed to just allow any origins to access this microservice. But if you are using Nuxt Security, there is a full configuration options that you can use to make your app secure. So I'm using Nuxt Supabase for database. And if we inspect the app.view, it just shows Nuxt welcome. There's no like advanced logic into it. We just have a Nuxt welcome. However, if we inspect server and API here, we will have 4 files here. So let's inspect one of them, for example, the get one. So each of these are responsible for like classic CRUD operations. So we have create, read, update, delete. Obviously, post, get, patch, and delete. So how it works is basically that we have this define event handler that we already seen today in the presentation. We have the import of server Supabase client. This is one of the utils of Supabase module that you can use to connect to Supabase on the server side. So we get the query with the util of H3 called get query. and we just extract the name of it. So if we have the name, and before that, we also need to register and create a client for Supabase. So if there is no name, so if the user didn't provide the name of the cat that he wants to retrieve, we will just return all cats. However, if he passes one, we just want to filter the result for the cat with the certain name. And all other methods are just the same. We just change the method. So in this case, we use the method delete from Supabase. In this case, we use the method update. And for the post, we just insert classic SQL statements, but in modern Supabase way. So for the cat consumer, we don't have any server. We don't have anything specific in the Nuxt app here, in the app.vue. We only have the Nuxt page component to be able to render pages in our pages directory. The index here just says that we need to visit /cat or /cat with the certain param to see the data about cats. And in here, what we have is we have a simple v4 where we are just mapping over the cats that we are getting from so far the localhost 3001, where the application will be running and we'll be fetching the cats from. And the name, almost the same, with just one difference that we are passing the param to get a certain cat. So I will run both services right now. So we are on dev here, and the yarn dev here as well. So what will happen is that we'll have those two applications running. And when I go to the browser, and I forgot to mention that I have 3 cats here, obviously in the Supabase. And later on, I will show you that the app is deployed as well. But if we inspect right now the browser on the localhost 3000/cat, we see 3 cute cats here. So these cats were basically not created here, but they were created and fetched from cat provider. So if we go to /cat, we see all the cats. If we go, for example, Garfield, we don't see a cat because there is no image for it. Okay, so we just see the 3 cats over here. So what I want to change right now is to not fetch the cat from the provider that is running in the application the same host. I just want to fetch the cats from the service that is already running. We are trying to, let's say, imagine the situation where we have those microservices built with Nuxt, and they are deployed already, and we are just fetching the data from them. So in here, I have the link for the application that is already running, as I mentioned, on Vercel. So I will just replace it. And then what will happen is when we visit the same page here and inspect the network and go for fetch and refresh the page, what we'll see here is it still tries to get the localhost 3001 because I'm trying to see the not all the cats, but just one single cat. So let's replace this one as well. Save it. And right now, we still see the cats. But in this case, the domain is different because we are fetching the data actually from Vercel, because this is the microservice, Nuxt microservice that I created. And I'm just fetching the data from it. So I will go back to the presentation and ask a fundamental question for what I showed you just before. But why? Why should I do it? Like, what is the point of having this, apart from the fact that it is possible? So my first honest answer would be just for fun, because it is possible to do such things. But I tend not to just do things for fun. I'm always trying to find a practical reason for doing things. So I think there are use cases for that, how we can utilize the functionality that I just showed you. So first of the reasons why I think this might be useful is the easiness of development. So as front-end developers, we don't like to touch the infrastructure, to touch the database. We just prefer to focus on what we like the most, so the front-end itself. So with using Nuxt for such a backend, we can use it to simply deploy it to any popular hosting providers, because deploying a Nuxt application on Vercel usually takes 2 or 3 minutes maximum. There is no extensive configuration needed, and we can use all of the popular and widely used Nuxt modules. I just showed you I used the Nuxt Supabase module, and in the API endpoints, I was basically developing this functionality in 5 lines of code. So what Supabase did is it helped front-end developers work with databases and auth. And what Nuxt allows you to do is to extend it even further to the infrastructure, allowing you to streamline the development process by a mile. And I mentioned it specifically because Vercel is only one of the available providers, but there are more. There is Netlify, Heroku, and many, many more that you can use, where Nuxt basically can be hosted very, very easily. So this is the first reason. And the second reason is something what I call the micro modules, which is basically a micro frontend plus microservice. So having such a microservice, which is deployed independently, it can have their own UI. They can have their own frontend. So we have the frontend and the backend deployed as one micro module. And this micro module might also export or basically have an interface, REST interface, REST API, that any other Nuxt application or any other application in general can talk to and get the data from. So one Nuxt backend or one Nuxt frontend can call another Nuxt backend, which can be quite useful, especially for larger applications. So one module handles both UI and logic, and we have one repository for certain domain of our app. So if you'd like to see the code, it's baroshem/Nuxt backend on GitHub. And I promised you a surprise about Nuxt security. So Nuxt security is currently at version 0.14.x, and it's used in several different projects already. So it's getting really stable. There were a lot of bug fixes, a lot of changes being done to the module itself. So I would like to welcome Nuxt security at RC, so the first RC version for the stable Nuxt security module. And I wanted to show you what was changed, because there were a lot of changes, and I would always want to start from the documentation, because this is the part where I spend a lot of time on to make it better. So Nuxt security documentation was looking like this. However, right now the documentation looks like this. So it's more in line with all the other modules that you can use in your Nuxt app, such as Nuxt image, Nuxt content, and Nuxt UI, for example. So right now, the module has much better documentation in terms of the headers, security response headers that you can use, the middlewares, the utils, frequently asked questions, because believe me, there are many, many questions being asked about how to configure your app securely. So here I try to summarize all the questions you might have. And basically, this, as I mentioned, also results in a new RC version with a lot of changes, as you can see here. And I would like to especially thank the contributors who were part of this release. And basically, I would also like to invite you to try it out and also let us know what we can do to make the module better. So coming back to the slides, if you'd like to see the documentation, it's nuxt-security.vercel.app. The repository is basically Nuxt-security, and for the newest release with the changes that I mentioned, basically 1.0.0-RC1. And I would also like to thank everyone who was participating and using the module, because it recently reached 500 GitHub stars, 250 used projects, and basically 200,000 downloads, which I believe is quite an achievement for a module, which is not like an image or a dev tool. It's more like related to one of the quality aspects of your application, such as security. So that will be it from my side. If you'd like to talk to me about any of the topics that I mentioned today, you can find me at Jakub Andrzejewski on Dev2X YouTube or Baroshem on GitHub. This is the only difference. But yeah, as I mentioned, if you'd like to talk about any of those, just let me know.
Great. Thank you, Jacob. And we do have a couple questions for you for the Q&A are there any alternatives to Nuxt that you would consider to use for a Vue front end? If so, what and why?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I'm addicted to Nuxt, I would say. So it will be difficult to go to another Vue front-end framework. However, if I would have to go somewhere else, I would most probably go to Quasar. I think that's the pronunciation of this project, which basically has the UI. They have the support for multiple devices like mobile, Android, iOS, stuff like that. So I would probably go there, but only if I had to. Like if I don't have to, I am sticking with the stack that I like the most, which is Nuxt.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, next question. What benefit of using Nuxt for your background has saved you the most time?
So I wouldn't say that it saved me time. I was more thinking about using it as a, let's say, interesting use case. But the thing is that if you just want to have some simple functionality being deployed as a backend, or if you want to have an application built with those kind of micro modules or micro frontends that communicate to each other, I would say that this might be useful for especially those independent deployments. So the problem is that when your application is like growing, it's much more difficult to maintain it as one team, because you might have certain parts of the application, and being able to like divide it, split it into smaller chunks, and not only to like split it on the front end, but split it on the back end as well. And what's best, split it on the front end and the back end and merge those parts together, as Nuxt can do it. This is what I think can be really especially useful. That basically you just have those parts that are separated. So you have here Nuxt front end and the back end, and another application which has their own front end and the back end. So this application can talk to the back end of this one. So you have, for example, a user and a product. So a user can basically talk to the backend of the product just to get the product data. And those services or modules can talk to each other and get the data from each other. And they can be like deployed and developed independently. So each team can have their own roadmap, their own like feature requests, and they can just work in their own speed, I would say.
Great, thank you. And this is a fantastic follow-up question that I think is good for especially those that have been in the industry for a while, even beginners. Is there anything you still find confusing about working with Nuxt as a backend?
Still,
or that you do find confusing, because I feel like a lot of people think that after so much time, someone will know it all, and when I've seen it's never ends.
So I'm pretty sure, or I would like to mention that I don't know everything. I shouldn't be like perceived as someone who knows everything. I actually don't know a lot, but the truth is that when I first thought about this, like using the Nuxt as the REST API as the backend only, I thought to myself that there is no reason for that, and just give up, don't do it. However, when I thought about this concept of the micro modules, so the micro frontend and the microservice itself, I actually thought that it might make sense, even though at first it might have sounded confusing. Like, why you have, you can have Vue.js or Nuxt on the front end, and you can have PHP or Nest.js server on the back end. So why you should mix them all together? But with the evolution of tools such as Supabase, where you can just interact with your database from the front end without needing to write a single line of code in SQL, you can just write JavaScript and you will get the same result. I would say the more developers and more projects will be moving towards the front end. So to enable front end doing stuff for the backend. So I would say that Nuxt, which provides basically a functionality to work on the backend from the front end for the front end developers, basically makes sense. Even though at first I thought that it's like completely crazy and I shouldn't be doing it, but I did it anyway.
Thank you. All right, 2 more questions. If this stack would be a suboptimal and just a good example, as you say, what would you more likely use for more in-depth projects?
So I use a bit different stack on a daily basis because I use Vue free with Vite and Nest.js as a backend. So I would definitely recommend that. However, if I could, I would probably switch the Vue free Vite into Nuxt. But when we started our project, Nuxt 3 was in very, very early edge version, so it wasn't ready to be used. While in the opposite, the Vue with Vite was already quite mature. So at this point, like my favorite stack of choice would be Nuxt and Nest.js on the backend. And I think that Nest.js is already very mature. I think recently it reached like 60,000 GitHub stars and many like million downloads or something like that. So I would say that even though it is Node.js, I would say it's quite stable and a reliable framework that you can depend on while building backend.
Great, thank you. Last question. What would you so this is kind of
I think it's
continuing
a
on.
connected question.
Yeah. If I'll just read it as is, of if this is not the optimal way, which real backend would you recommend to pair with Nuxt? They have a couple of full stack projects with Supabase and Prisma ORM, and all with the same Nuxt.js projects.
So as I mentioned, I would go for Nest.js. Purely because of maturity of the framework and the concepts and patterns that this framework introduces. So basically it gives you both tools and the patterns that you can use to build your application. So by following the principles that are part of the framework, such as Nest.js, it's very difficult to make mistakes, which are the most, let's say, expensive ones, I would say, because if you follow the patterns that were already like defined a long time ago and a lot of people were thinking about them, it's much more difficult to make like bad decisions on the, let's say, architecture side of the application. So I think if you are into like JavaScript stack, like you have Nuxt.js, but you would like to, for example, migrate to some kind of backend JavaScript framework, I would totally go for Nest.js. Like, I think it's quite stable, and it offers everything that you might desire to build applications with it. And I can say it from experience, because when I was building my own like open source project with Nest.js specifically, I was looking for things like how to connect Nest.js to Elasticsearch, or how to connect Nest.js to Stripe or something like this. And I was pleasantly surprised back then, and it was like 4 years ago. I was pleasantly surprised that whenever I was searching for the information, I wasn't like finding articles. I was finding documentation that was showing me how to do that with a specific plugin or module that I could just import, and it was working out of the box. So yeah, I would go for Nest.js.
Yay. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. See you next time.
Thanks.